We're in chapter 8 of the Gospel of Luke. For those of you who have the outline, is page 16. We've been on that page, 4 weeks? Something, maybe longer. But I want to immerse your minds in the text so that the power in the Word of God, the written Word of God, can be effective in your hearts and minds. If you just go superficially over it, it tends to go one ear and out the other and never passes through. That reminds me of a joke. Everything reminds me of a joke. Did you hear about the definition of a college lecture? A college lecture is a method for passing material from the professor to the student without going through the mind of either. And I want to avoid that at all costs. Calming a storm. Now, it's a little difficult for me and for most people, scholars, to understand exactly why Luke organizes this material in the order he does. It's much more obvious in the Gospel of Matthew. It's even more obvious in the Gospel of Mark why the material is ordered like it is. And it may be that it's something that is known only to Luke. You remember when he said, inasmuch as many people have taken up to write about these things, I've decided to research them, paraphrasing, research them and put them in order. Now, most people, and I did for years, think that meant that chronological order. It does not. You can prove that because you can compare the different versions, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and find that they put them in different orders. So it's an order according to his purpose. Now, I know what his overall purpose in writing Luke and Acts. It was to show, demonstrate to Theophilus, his mid-level Roman bureaucrat, and I know that by the title he uses, excellent, how the gospel started in Judea, how it went to Samaria, and then the uttermost parts of the world. He says that in Acts 1:8. Now, what I don't see is how this order fits that purpose. It does. I have no doubt that it does, because he is too good a writer and too good a historian not to use it in a way that will further his right. Probably Theophilus knew, in less probable, but probably his original readers knew. You and I just don't. Now, I just say that because, I'm always trying to tie the order in these gospel pericopes to the purpose of the writer. So, we'll just have to, all that running around the mulberry bush is to say, you don't know, I don't know, probably nobody knows. Okay. One day he and his disciples got into a boat, and he said to them, "Let us go to the opposite shore of the lake." Now, the opposite shore of the lake, or the ocean, or the sea, it's called all those things, was on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. It was opposite Galilee proper. You can stand anywhere in Galilee on the shore, on the western shore of the lake, and see all the way across it when there's no clouds or fog. It's just measured in just, I don't know, 12, 15 miles, but it's flat, nothing in the way, and there's mountains on the other side, so you can see it. So when you see the other side, it always means the eastern shore of the sea, because the perspective of writers in the Old and New Testament was always from the promised land someplace else. Or if they're talking about Jerusalem, it's from Jerusalem down. Not only because in most directions you go down literally, in lower altitude, but you go down spiritually. That was their perception of it. You go down. So that's just, that equips you to do your own study. When you see that phrase, you'll know what it means. Let's go to the opposite shore of the lake. And then in typical Lucan, they did so. Jesus states, they do. And I know that is a stylistic way of saying he is in charge. When he says it, it's so. That's exactly a statement of his divine origin, because that's what the Father did. He started by saying, let there be light. And to paraphrase or to translate effectively, and light already was. All God has to do is say the word. Now, that doesn't mean that he hollered out into the nothingness, let there be light. I don't know how God speaks. And you don't either. Because in the Bible, he spoke in many different ways. The prologue to the book of Hebrews says that he spoke in many ways, many times, and so on to many people. But he spoke it, and it is. Actually, that's one of the underlying presuppositions of the series Max has just finished, is that when God says it, it is. It exists. And we need that assurance. That's part of the assurance that can bring the peace that passes understanding. If God says, the Lord is near, meaning he is available, ready, willing, and able to meet your needs, guess what? He is literally ready, willing, and able to meet every need you have. And that is one of the most comforting and calming, and whatever other adjectives Max has used. And so let's make that the rock bottom foundation of our faith. Let's go on. As they were sailing along, he fell asleep. Do you know there's a theology in the Bible about God who doesn't sleep? He neither slumbers nor sleeps. Remember, when Elijah had the contest with the prophets of Baal, love that delicious irony that he uses. He said, maybe you ought to yell a little louder. Maybe he's asleep, or he's turned aside to the way. Now that's a cryptic phrase. It means he went to the bathroom along the way. In other words, you've got a human God. Our God is not. He's really God. He doesn't slumber or sleep. So I'm sure that Luke consciously put this in there, not only because he's recording a historical fact, but the historical fact is based on the humanity of Jesus. See, again, I keep hammering this because I know how hard it is for us conservative believers to really comprehend what it means that he was fully human. He was fully human without surrendering one iota of his divinity, because he had to sleep. He got tired. God never rests. And it was as the divine Messiah that he made the promise that Max alluded to today. That he, wasn't Max, it was our elder, that he brings rest for the weary, cessation of labor to those who are tired. Now, here is the scene. I learned a lot about this scene several years ago when the elders here at Oak Hills sent me to a Biblical Archaeology Review weekend, the magazine, BAR. It was in Fort Worth, Texas, and we had the world's outstanding expert on first century shipping and sailing practices. And Luke doesn't put it here. I don't know why. It wasn't suited, he didn't want to, for one thing. What he had rested his head on, it says, he rested his head on a pillow. That conveys the wrong conception and idea to people today. What it was a leather sack full of sand that was used as ballast to keep the ship upright against the pressure of the wind on the sails. And it was not a soft, downy pillow. It was hard, made out of leather. But he slept. The Japanese still sleep on pillows. They have a wooden block about so high, and then they roll a roll of silk hard and put it in a depression in that block, and then they put their head on it. I'd wake up with the crick so bad I'd never straighten my neck if I did that.
I think cowboys did that too, didn't they?
Oh yes, they put their saddle down, and a saddle, it may not be as hard as a bony horseback, vertebra, backbone, but it's plenty hard. So that's what you visualize. He was tired. That's the humanity of Jesus. He was going to get rest. He knew the disciples were really well-qualified seamen, knew as much about boats as anybody. So he lay down to take a rest.
Charles, Luke doesn't say anything about the pillow. Is that in another?
Yes, that's what I thought I made that clear.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you say which one or wherever.
It's in Matthew.
Matthew says it.
Probably in Mark.
Thanks.
And so just visualize that. Here we are on the sea. Now, it's a very small sea. It's sometimes called the Lake of Gennesaret. But it is surrounded on a little better than 3 sides by fairly high mountains. And you know what happens when air goes over something with a hollow? Did you ever have a whistle? Did you ever take a plastic tube or something and blow across it? You can make a whistle out of it. And that whistle is because the air is turbulent in there. So when the wind comes blowing across those mountaintops, it sets up a tremendous turbulence, a horizontal cyclone. And that, it can go from absolute calm to seas high enough to sink any vessel. Jesse?
Some theories that say that that's the way most tornadoes start out, is that type of a column horizontally and then it turns vertical.
Well, the reason it turns vertical is that there's air rushing up. The hot air goes up through cold, and then that starts it rotating vertically. But, so here they were, calm, peaceful. The Lord is asleep. His apostles probably felt kind of protective of him. They might even have whispered. You can see, don't wake the Lord. But then, comes the blast of air. The worst ones came off of the Arabian desert, and they were called a Scirocco. Let's see, what is it out in California? It's called a...
Santa Ana winds.
What?
Santa Ana winds.
Santa Ana, because it's from the direction of Santa Ana. And when that dry wind hits the moist air over the lake, it goes in 10 seconds, maybe that's too fast, but almost, it would seem like it would be instantly, from placid calm to turbulence that's about to sink the boat. So I want you to absorb that picture because Luke is emphasizing that. Then a powerful squall descended on them, and they were being swamped by the large waves and were in great danger. Now, this is not a literal translation. This is my translation to try to get it over. Literally it says, and they were sinking. But I wanted to get the idea that they were not what we would say going to the bottom necessarily. The waves were overwhelming them. And if that continued, they would sink.
They were taking on water.
Yeah, they were, yes. I started to use that, Jesse, but I thought this would do well. They said to him, they went to him and woke him up saying, Master, Master, we're going to die, all going to die.
Sorry.
Anxiety, right? Anxiety in the presence of one that they addressed as Master or Lord. I wanted the word master here because I think it is not Lord in the sense of his divinity. It just means sir. I could put sir, but that sounded too informal and too, not informal, but too, I don't know what word I want, so you just have to supply your own. And so, Master. Then he got up and rebuked the wind and the large waves. Notice I put large in there because the word that is, the Greek word that's translated waves means a large wave. I can't remember even what it is right now. If I saw it,
That version says surging waves.
Yes.
American Standard says the surging waves.
Okay, that's that you can trust the American Standard to be fairly literal.
They use swamped too, by the way.
Uh-huh.
They like that.
Yeah, and so that's the thing. It would be this little boat with waves maybe 20 feet high. And if you're in a boat whose sail is only, or even the mast, if the sail is down, which it probably was, for only 20 feet high, and you got a 10 or 15 feet high, and you've got a 20-foot wave, that's scary. Just plain scary. They had every right to feel anxious. What they failed to do was to know that Jesus was on their side. And he was ready, willing, and able to take care of them. That's the lesson Luke is driving home right here. I don't care how threatening the situation is. And boy, we can get in threatening situations. I foolishly, when I was 15 years old, decided to stay in Blessing, Texas, which is down on the coast, through a hurricane that was predicted to be 115 mile an hour sustained winds or better. Because the fellow I was staying with, it was a cousin of a cousin or something. I can't even remember the exact relationship now. He was a volunteer weatherman, and they requested him to stay. And we going to ride out the storm in a cement-lined sump by a pump station. That's where all the valves and everything are. So along about midnight, we climbed out of our little shelter down in there because it was raining, cats and dogs. And the wind was going 115 miles an hour. The anemometer was... Just after we got our heads down below the level of that concrete sump, it blew the wind gauge away. I mean, just blew it away, just like that. So, and it got stronger. And that's when I began to wonder if I'd made the wrong choice. But you know what? Once you're there, you have to stick it out in whatever kind of shelter you got, because it's worse outside. Now that...
You were also in a sailboat that time with Hank.
Oh, yeah.
You all had a really hard time.
Yeah.
Things got way up.
We were in Chesapeake Bay, and the waves were supposed to be no more than 18 inches or 2 feet high. And so we sailed out of the protected bay into the main Chesapeake Bay. And the waves were about 5 feet high. And if you're in a boat, the gunnels of which are only about 2.5 or 3 feet, 5-foot waves look as tall as those waves look to the apostles. Since he was much better at using the tiller and staying into the wind than I was, we needed to let down the jibsail. And on his little sailboat, the only way you could do it, you had to crawl out on that foredeck and lower it by hand. And so the wind is blowing about 25 miles an hour in my face, and there's no hold on that thing. It's just a smooth, slick surface. So I crawled gingerly out, wishing I had suction cups on my knees and fingers, and managed to do like this and get that sail down, and immediately it helped. So you can, if you have any experiences like this, and most of us have some kind of experience like that, you will know what Jesus is ready to help you with. No matter how high the waves, no matter how strong the wind, no matter how great the need, Jesus is willing, ready, willing, and able to help you. He is that because the Father is always ready, willing, and want to help you. So turn it over to God. Now that's not it. God doesn't promise all of us a miracle every time. I firmly believe that He still does miracles. We just don't have any prophets around who can tell us it's a miracle. It's coincidence, it's natural phenomena or something, but it's still God.
In a sense, if we truly believe in God, we say it can happen. We don't necessarily say it has to happen, but we live in an expectation we don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, here's the thing, the expectation that you are 1,000,000 times better off turning it over to God than you are trying to handle it yourself. Now, as I say, God doesn't promise miracles all the time and in every occasion. I cannot say, well, if you just turn it over to God, you will be delivered. No, you may not be delivered, but God is God even if you're not.
He still has a purpose.
Yeah. When we sing the old song, Safe in the Arms of Jesus, as Paul says, whether I live or whether I die, it's relatively indifferent to me. Making my own paraphrase there. If it were the thing that would be best for me, I would go and be with the Lord. But it's best for you that I stay around. And that is the idea. It is far better to die in God than to live apart from Him. That's always true. There's no situation that is not better if you live in God and God lives in you. And that's the lesson of this pericope. Then he got up and rebuked the wind and the large waves. They both ceased, and all was calm. Now, we know that that was a miracle because it happened at the word of the Son of God. But you know what? It could have just as easily happened as a natural meteorological phenomenon. It is not what happens that makes something a miracle. It's when it happens.
Timing.
Yeah. We know that all of our diseases are going to be healed. And boy, right now, I sure wish I had one that was healed. I've been having great trouble with back pain. I've had 2 major surgeries for spinal stenosis and bulging discs. And the pain has returned. And I think it's probably that old osteo is pinching nerves in my spine. Our primary care physician has been on temporary medical leave to battle cancer. She's improving and supposed to be back on the 1st of September. But that means that the remaining physicians in the group are snowed under. So when I called Wednesday or Thursday, they couldn't promise me. They said, we'll try to get you in before the weekend. If not, we'll try on Monday. But we cannot promise any particular time. So I can't wait till Monday. But I don't dare say, well, I know I'll get in, because I may not. But I sure would like to. The only thing I know is that the pain is more bearable because I'm a believer in God and Christ than it would be if it weren't. I have to do all kinds of things to try to alleviate the pain and get it to where it doesn't make my legs so weak I can hardly stand up. So I'm not just talking theoretically when I talk about pain and suffering. Now I'm not suffering in the sense of 11 out of a 10 or something like that. It's completely bearable. It's just deucedly uncomfortable, as Churchill said. So that's a living example, not because I'm better than you or more holy, but because I'm just me, and I know what it means to me, and I'm honor bound to share that with you. That's what it means to use my experience to encourage you. So if you hurt, I'll be glad to listen. I'll be glad to pray. Be glad to pray privately or with you or publicly, whatever. But we're in this boat together. You notice the deliberate pun there?
Charles, can I back up? You jumped into the next verse before I could raise my hand, but I just like to meditate and marvel on how at peace Jesus was to fall asleep in that boat and to just sleep during that storm. How much he trusted the Father, that he was just sleeping because he had complete trust in the Father that everything was fine.
But I want to expand that idea. He not only trusted the Father,
Trusted the disciples.
he trusted those fallible disciples. We would usually say he entrusted his safety to their sailing ability. And that's hard. The only person that I could allow to drive with me in the car and go to sleep was Mina. But now, just any old guy will do. It's because I have no choice. I cannot do it myself. And so, I commend myself to the Lord and to them. See, again, I use myself as an example for the good or bad, for your enlightenment and to help you live your life better. Do we go anything else, Pam?
No.
Okay.
Thanks for that thought. I've never thought of it that way.
Where is your faith? He chided them. Now, faith in what or whom? Okay, don't you say anything, and you don't, Jesse. Anybody? Come on. I'm going to call you by name if you. It's better to volunteer.
What faith in whom you say?
In God.
What?
In God.
Yes. But specifically on this occasion,
Oh, I know. Because he said, let us go to the other side. They should have known they were going to get to the other side. Faith in his word,
yes.
faith in his command.
Faith in the master. They've already
Master's
owned him as
command.
master. See? And that's the lesson that Luke is driving home here. We will get to the
Other side.
other
The
side,
opposite shore.
the shore. Gonna go across Jordan on the other side. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. That's almost the melody. You're lucky that I was that close. See, that's the promise. That's the promise of His Word. When we believed, we were, in the language of Paul, justified. And that means the verdict at the day of judgment has already been declared in our case. I really like to hammer that home. We really did when we studied Romans together. But that's what it means. We will all face judgment for everything we've done. But if we've placed our faith in Jesus, we know what the verdict is going to be. Not guilty. Would you be very afraid if you knew, because the judge told you ahead of time, and that's what he did, isn't it? He tells us ahead of time, the verdict I'm going to render in your case is not guilty. And all that takes is trust in Jesus. That's the single requirement. You don't have to be a super saint. You don't have to work your fingers to the bone. You don't have to be a preacher or an elder or deacon or special servant. You just have to trust Jesus. And that's exactly what the apostles did there. They trusted Jesus. He had said, we are going to go to the other side. And there it is. Jesse.
It's interesting, though, that Mark, in the parallel passage here, they say, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?"
Mm-hmm.
It's almost, and Mark tends to do that, it seems like, in bringing up a negative side of what they were saying.
I'm not absolutely sure, but I'm fairly sure that this is a rhetorical question in Greek. And the only way we can get it, equivalent question in English is, you are, what does it say?
It said, do you not care that we are perishing?
Yeah, you do care that we are perishing,
Don't you?
don't you? See that?
In other places, Jesus told people, my time has not yet come. They're in His presence. So, again, their faith, this is not His time. His time has not come at this point yet. He's not met the cross. And whether they understood that He was going to the cross, I don't know, but He had a purpose. They're with Him, and therefore...
Yeah. This is one of the major problems. I'm making lessons on the Gospel of Matthew, who brings this out very clearly. Who do the people say I am? Elijah, one of the prophets, John the Baptist returned from the dead, so on. Who do you say I am? Old Peter. You have some Peter in you, Jesse. He rushed in and said, "You are the Christ of God, the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus blessed him. And Peter just preened like a rooster on a manure pile. But then Jesus began to tell them that he had to go up to Jerusalem, be delivered into the hands of the Gentiles, put to death. And Peter flip-flopped from the Lord's side to the opposing side, for that's what Satan means. I am not sure there, but I think Satan there should not have a capital S. I do it because every translation does. But I think it just means one who opposes the works of God. And even if it's personified in a literal living devil, it still means one who opposes the work of God. And see, Peter was on a roller coaster. He was up. Oh, he was up. And then his hopes for a triumphal Messiah who would lead the armies of Israel to overthrow the Roman Empire and substitute in its place the everlasting Davidic kingdom. In other words, there'd be a Jewish, worldwide, age-long empire. For Peter obviously was of that thought. We've talked about the fact that there were two views of the nature of the Messiah. Because from a human standpoint, what the prophets have to say about a Messiah, he would be triumphant. He'd heal all diseases. He would make an everlasting kingdom. But at the same time, Isaiah talks about a suffering servant whose pains and wounds would heal our stripes, and who would die for his people. And they couldn't comprehend that paradox. Jesus did just that, both triumphal and sacrificial Messiah. But Peter couldn't get his mind around that. And so, where is your faith? Filled with both terror and awe. Now, I can't remember exactly what this is literally in Greek, but both of those ideas are there. It is, I think it's fear and awe. I wanted to get terror. They were terrorized. When you see the occasion of Peter walking on water, they were terrorized thinking he was a ghost. And they were terrorized at this. Who are we following? Even the winds and the waves obey him. And they do it instantly. He speaks and it occurs. There should be an element of that fearful awe in every remembrance of God and of his Christ. See, we have been granted the right to approach the throne of the Majesty on high freely, like free people approach their ruler. But that is a grant based on the grace of God. It's not a right. So even if we do freely, you know that I was asked to lead the invocation when Jim Burnett became again the chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, and the vice president, the old elder George Bush, was there. And he was very gracious. The only pay that Jim could afford, or the only pay that he was allowed to, he couldn't pay for my services, was 15-minute chat with the Vice President of the United States. And while he was a very gracious man, I was always constantly aware that here was a man with charismatic power. I don't mean gift of the Holy Spirit. I don't know what he is as a believer. But I was definitely aware. It kind of felt like a warm glow on my skin. He didn't glow, but that was there. And that's the way I think we ought to always think of God when we're in His presence. We ought to be in awe of His power, and therefore very grateful that He has arranged for us to approach Him and just chat with Him like I chatted with the Vice President of the United States. If I had any claim to earthly glory, it would be the picture. I didn't even know that Jim Burnett took a picture of it till we moved away, and he gave me an autographed picture of us standing there together. I showed it to some of you. And I'm just using that again as an example of how we ought to take advantage of our privilege. We don't have to cower. We don't have to kowtow or fall down on our faces. But we have to be aware of the privilege that has been extended to us through Christ.
I think that it's interesting that you were saying your translation, Master, Master, should not be Lord, Lord, because of the fact that they probably weren't at that stage yet of acknowledging who He was. And this brings out the fact that they're not. Who is this that He commands even the winds and the waves and they obey Him?
Okay.
And I've done some thinking on this as well, that this kind of represents the powers that Adam was originally endowed with, and that they were astonished that
Yes.
that there was a man like this.
Yeah, Adam and Eve were the only human beings who could approach God without being in awe of Him. It was only after they sinned that they felt in awe of Him so much that they realized they were naked and went and hid. Okay, Alicia?